Here we have an example. Solve for the cosine equal negative 0.51 on the interval 0 to 2 pi. Okay, how do we do it? Let me bring it on down here. Cosine of x is negative 0.51. Let me go to the notes I'm sending you. So here are the notes. Coming up to number 1 here, it says if you have only one type of trig function, which we do, we just have cosine. First power only, yep, we just have first power cosine, get it alone. And then take it to the unit circle, get your 2 answers. I think it already is alone. If the value is not on the unit circle, then see number 3 below. That's our situation, right? So it already is alone, and negative 0.51, that's not on the unit circle. Unit circle only has like a half and square root of 3 over 2 and square root of 2 over 2 and things like that, 0 and 1. This is not on the unit circle. So what do we do in that case? If the value is not on the unit circle, see number 3 below. So number 3, when we must use a calculator because the values are not on the unit circle. After getting sine, cosine, or tangent alone, then take the inverse sine, cosine, or tangent of both sides. All right, let's do that. So we're going to do the inverse. So I'm going to go, whoops, not inverse, inverse cosine. And that makes sense because it's the inverse. It's the opposite of cosine. So if we do it on both sides, it will cancel out the cosine on the cosine inverse will cancel out the regular cosine. We'll get x alone. But I'm breaking one of the rules right now. Did you notice it? Let's go back. I didn't read that careful. After getting sine, cosine alone, then take the inverse sine, cosine, tangent on both sides. But, better keep reading. Before hitting the inverse button on the calculator, change the number on the other side to be positive, even if it was negative at first. Ah, that's really important. So let's do that. So this should be made positive. So change to positive. There we go. All right. So now hit the buttons on the calculator. That's what I'm going to do. Oh, make sure you're in radian mode. This is all radians. No degrees for any of this. Unless otherwise stated, everything's radians. So I'm getting 1.0356. All right. Is that one of our answers? Actually, no. That's none of our answers, but that'll help us get our answers. Let me show you what we do next. Let's go to the notes. All right. So we... got that? Realize now that your answer is an angle in the first quadrant. Why? Because we changed the right side number to be positive. All trig functions are positive in the first quadrant. That's right. All students take calculus. They're all positive in the first. So when we made it positive, that forced it to be in the first quadrant. Okay. Is that the end of the world? Yeah, it's not what we're going to use it, but it's not our final answer yet. We need to find 2 quadrants. We need to find the 2 quadrants where our answers will be using all students take calculus, the quadrants where the various trig functions are positive. Okay, so we got to go back to our question and say, okay, let's take a look at this. If I come over here and draw an axis system and think about all students take calculus. Our original question, it was negative. It was where is cosine negative, right? That's what we're trying to really answer. I know we changed it to positive for some reasons which you'll see in a minute. But really, we're trying to answer the question, where is cosine negative? So where is cosine negative? What quadrants is cosine negative? They're all positive here and cosine's positive there. So we're talking the second and third quadrants, right? Cosine will be negative here. Let me make that a straight line. Here and here. In those 2 quadrants, cosine will be negative. Let me draw one there as well. So I'll show you why I'm drawing those in a minute. So, okay, and then they told me, so I'm looking, I need second quadrant and third quadrant. That's where cosine will be negative. Our 2 answers will be in the second and third quadrant. That's where cosine is negative. So how do we get those answers in the second and third quadrant? Let me just show you right now. They said, remember that this number is first quadrant. In other words, 1.03 is how far from 0 in the first quadrant. So that means this right here is 1.0356, and this right here is 1.0356. In other words, if you're off of the x-axis, let me draw the x-axis here. If you're off the x-axis, above it or below it, in any quadrant, you're going to have the same trig value, sine, cosine, tangent. They're all going to be the same, except for pluses and minuses, if you're the same reference angle, meaning you're the same distance off the x-axis. So this one, that's why we bothered to find this first quadrant answer. That tells us how far off the x-axis we should be, but our true answers are that far off the x-axis in the second and in the third quadrants. The true answer is here and here. Why? Because that's where cosine's negative, second and third quadrant. So we need to find those actual angles, meaning I need to find out how far from 0 all the way to there. For starters, how am I going to do that? Well, can you tell that to get that, you're going to have to go, let me pick a good way to do this, you're going to need to go all the way to pi, which is 180, and then back up 1.0356. So in other words, pi minus 1.0356. That'll tell you how far that highlighted yellow angle is, right? It's all the way to pi, right? This is pi, back up 1.0356. That's how far the yellow line is. So that'll be our second quadrant answer. So use your calculator, hit the pi button, and subtract 1.0356. I'm getting 2.106. I'll say it's 5.9. So there we go. There's our second quadrant answer. Now we need to get our third quadrant answer. So let me, we need to leave that. Okay. So let me do the best I can with some different colors here. We need to get all the way to there now. There's our third quadrant answer from 0. Right? Angles are always measured from 0. How are we going to get that? Well, you go all the way to pi and then go 1.0356 more. Right? It's pi plus instead of pi minus. Do you see that? It's beyond pi. So pi plus the 1.0356 will give us our third quadrant answer. Do you see that? Because it's all the way to pi, right here, all the way to pi, plus, even further, 1.0356. So hit the pi button again on your calculator, and this time add 1.0356 because it's beyond pi. So I'm getting 4.177. That's our third quadrant answer. So those are our two answers. So 106, comma 4.177. Those are the two angles in the second and third quadrant, pi minus and pi plus. Do you see why we bothered to find that first quadrant answer? Then we used that to find the same spots in the second and third quadrants, the same spots off the x-axis. Remember, as long as you go off the x-axis the same amount, your sine, your cosine, your tangent, all the trig functions are going to be the same except for positive or negative, except for the sign. So that's going to be the same values at those places. So we just took pi minus, pi backed up into the second quadrant, and then pi add into the third quadrant to get our second and third quadrant answers. That's back here in the notes. If you look at it, I'm going through if you have first quadrant, if you have second quadrant, third. We just did second and third. Notice, right, oops, what am I doing? There we go. Right here, pi minus and pi plus for the second and third quadrant answer. If you ever need the fourth, it's 2 pi minus, and that's how you do it. And so I just did the same thing. There we go. There are our two answers for that problem.